In the centre of Pontypridd this afternoon, one of many places in these valleys still reeling from the impact of the weekend floods.
Can somebody take a photo?
He asks if the sandbags made any difference.
You've got some sandbags, they didn't make any difference.
She shakes her head. So many businesses here were flooded and not all insured. Like the fashion boutique run by Emma Jamal and her husband, where hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of stock was ruined by 4 feet of floodwater.
It was unbelievable. Nothing prepared us for what we witnessed. Some of them. It was like an earthquake.
As well as those caught up in the flooding, he met emergency services and council staff involved in the response. Not far from the Lido he'd only reopened a few years ago, now badly damaged and shut for months to come. Several miles away in Treforest, more businesses pile up their debris. We're shown into a repair garage and are told 150 cars here have been written off. Then a manufacturing plant with £1 million worth of machinery damage. And an NHS depot where outside they've brought some of the 600 wheelchairs damaged in the flood.
We've had 2.5 foot of water throughout the entire building. So we've had to look at all our stock on the ground floor, take it out, look at what we can decontaminate, what we can refurbish. A lot of the building work needs to be ripped out. It's been a huge devastation to us and neighbouring facilities as well.
In some streets which were flooded still lie abandoned cars, laden with mud. This road is yet to get its gas supply back. And while some begin the painstaking process of repair, others, like Stephen Davies, are still salvaging what they can. How are you going to find new accommodation?
Well, it's going to be hard in this area because I think a lot of people are in the same boat, aren't they?
Have you started looking for somewhere?
We haven't yet, no, we haven't yet.
Some residents, like Diane Sanford, whose 91-year-old mother had her home flooded, can do little until the insurance companies have assessed the damage. You can't take the furniture out at the moment?
No.
Because you have to wait for the insurance?
We have to wait for the assessor to come on Tuesday. He said he's coming down from Gatwick, and because he is so inundated, he can't get to me until next Tuesday. And he said he'll be down here a couple of weeks, just seeing to people and assessing different people. I mean, it's so widespread. As is the infrastructure damage. Overnight, another bridge in Pontypridd was closed due to structural concerns. Some are still strewn with the remnants of Storm Dennis. These just some of the multi-million-pound repairs the Welsh Government wants the Treasury to help fund. There is so much damage that people are still having to confront now, several days after the River Taff burst its banks. Look at these allotments. The Tin Plate Works allotments in Treforest, levelled as if by tsunami is how one here describes it, and all now quietly absorbed by old friends sheltering in one of the few bankside huts left standing. It's all gone?
Everything. Birds, a lot. All the sheds that was along there, everything.
How are you feeling, Wayne?
Well, cut dead really, but what can we do?
Well, our reporter Jane Dodge is in Kirby Wharf in North Yorkshire now. Jane, put us in the picture about what's going on there.
Well, the people here in this small Yorkshire village of Kirby Wharf are watching and waiting tonight. Some of them from their kitchen windows overlooking floodwater here. They know all too well about the risk of flooding. These houses have been flooded 4 or 5 times over the years, the worst back in 2015. Now, though, they've taken things into their own hands and bought this. It's a 150-metre long aqua dam full of water, and it's the very same water, flood water, that's lapping up here beside me on the path.
People are uncertain, they can't sell the properties, people want to move on, and there's always one eye on the weather living here, and it just makes life uncomfortable.
Will people be able to relax this weekend?
Certainly not, no.
For those nervously watching, like Richard, water levels over the weekend, there are, though, some words of reassurance from the Environment Agency.
We're keeping a close eye on the river levels, so we're monitoring river levels across Yorkshire. We expect the rivers to rise as the rain starts to fall, so we're making sure all our defences are working and functioning, all our pumps are working, all our trash screens are cleared, and we are running 24/7 to make sure we can warn and inform people if levels start to rise to a tricky situation.
And a reminder of those areas that face the risk of further flooding this weekend, the Pennines and parts of the Midlands and the north of England.
Jane, thanks very much. Fatima.
Well, our weather presenter Liam Dutton is with me now. Liam, people are bracing themselves. How bad is it going to get with the rain this weekend?
Well, obviously any rain is not welcome at all, but it's important to make the point that the rain that we're going to see this weekend isn't going to be anywhere near the scale that we saw last weekend with Storm Dennis, or the weekend before that with Storm Kira. So in those storms we had 6 inches of rain. In the weather warning affected areas of northern England and Wales this weekend, we could see 1 to 2 inches, maybe 3 inches, so much less in terms of the amount of rain that's falling.
And what about the implications for flooding?
Well, there are 2 aspects for the potential for flooding this weekend. Obviously, the ground is still saturated. More rain falling on top of that will mean that there's the risk of further surface water flooding, disruption to travel, maybe some homes and businesses flooded too. And then there's the river level side of things. Obviously, the rivers are still high, and for the bigger rivers, it takes a number of days for the water to flow down from the hills into those parts of the catchment. So we still need to watch the risk of river flooding into next week as well.
OK, you'll be back at the end of the programme. Thanks so much, Liam. Kathy.
Thanks, Fatima. Well, earlier I spoke to the Welsh actor and activist Michael Sheen via the internet from New York. He's spearheading a crowdfunding campaign for victims of the flooding. I began by asking him how much he's hoping to raise.
There's no limit, really. We just want to keep going. People who have been affected by the flooding all across Wales, it's going to go on for a very long time. You know, after the news and the column inches stop talking about what's going on, people will still be affected by it. So we want to try to just keep going.
And you've given your own money as well. What's behind your interest in this campaign, your decision to start this campaign?
Well, I was watching, images like everyone else on the news and online of what was going on, seeing people being evacuated out of their homes and small businesses having to throw away their stock, the devastation that was going on there, and seeing, the risks of tips with landslides happening again, images that we haven't seen for a long time and that for us in Wales hold huge emotional power, and it just really moved me, as it did so many people. So I went to look at how I could help, how I could contribute some money to help, and I saw that there were lots of fundraising sites going on, most of them for individual areas or particular places, and I couldn't find anything that was sort of more overarching for the whole of Wales. So I remembered that I'm the president of the Wales Council for Voluntary Action, who of course have a network of community groups, local community groups all over Wales. And so we talked about setting something up where Wales Council for Voluntary Action could hold the money centrally and then distribute it to the local groups. It's always the same when something terrible and devastating like this happens. You see the best and the worst, the worst as in what damage can be done and the vulnerabilities that we have as a society and certain communities have. But we also see the best in the way that communities pull together. And I've been hearing today about in an area in Aberdeenshire where people who live there have the canal on one side, the river on the other. So the devastation has been awful. And my own, I've had a family member who lives in that area who had to be evacuated by boat last Sunday morning and just left in her pajamas, literally what she was wearing, and a dog under each arm, and had to leave all her possessions behind, and doesn't know when she'll get back, doesn't know how much might be rescuable because of health risks to do with sewage that has leaked out. So and you see people rallying around, and in that area in Aberdeenshire, I know that local businesses have helped out. They've brought food and clothing and water, and even the local chip shop is giving food away to people.
Given that when the government took power just before Christmas, they made much of the fact that they called themselves the government of the people, listening to ordinary people. What do you make of the fact that Boris Johnson has sort of gone to ground in Kent, hasn't been seen in Wales, appears to have no plans to visit or indeed call a COBRA emergency committee meeting?
Well, it is very disconcerting. It seems like this is the first big test of a lot of what was spoken about before the election in terms of how much the union mattered, how much the devolved nations mattered, and how important it was to this government to make sure that everyone felt that they were included and would be cared about and committed to. And here we have the first big test of that. And as far as I know, the only response so far from Westminster has been that flooding is a devolved matter. And which, does sound scarily like you're on your own. So
what do you
I know
say
that
to the Prime Minister?
I'm sorry?
What do you say to the Prime Minister if he was here in front of you now?
I'd say that, you know, Wales is, for the time being, part of the United Kingdom. The people here, the community here are suffering. They put a lot of trust in you, a lot more trust in you than you've had in the past as a Conservative Party recently in the last election. And that trust needs to be rewarded, I would say, by, at the very least, saying that you care about what's going on and that you're going to do everything you can. We're not even getting those words, let alone the actions at the moment. It's way beyond what the Welsh Government can cope with at the moment. It's on a huge scale what's going on here. So we really do need a combined effort.
Michael Sheen, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, thank you.
Well, joining me now from Monmouth, where there has been serious flooding, is the Welsh Office Minister, Davies. It's also his constituency there. Mr Davies, let's just start with what Michael Sheen ended up there, saying that people have put a lot of trust in your government, and actually they're not getting kind words, let alone action at the moment.
Well, first of all, can I say to both Michael Sheen and you that this constituency has been very badly affected by flooding, and the Chief Executive was absolutely clear. He didn't want Prime Ministers, he didn't want Members of Parliament, he didn't want actors and celebrities turning up in the middle of a rescue operation trying to get selfies and publicity. He actually asked us to stay away. So that was the first thing until last night when we moved into the recovery phase. And that's why. No. May I just finish? Because let me not pick you up on that.
The Prime Minister could have called a Cobra. Let me just say, the Prime Minister could have called a Cobra emergency committee, which he did at the last set of floods in the middle of an election campaign. Why has he not even done that?
Well, first of all, you asked me why people weren't visiting. The Chief Executive of this constituency, which is one of the worst affected constituencies in Wales, asked people to stay away. So that answers your first question. The second point is this. It is a devolved issue, and both Simon Hart, the Secretary of State for Wales, and myself are very sensitive to the accusations from people, funny enough, from some celebrities, in fact, that we're trying to ride roughshod over the devolution settlement. We are not responsible for the health service or for education or for flood defences in Wales, and we understand that. But
Okay,
what we have said, Simon said this very clearly to the First Minister. No, may I answer your question? Because, frankly, you put it in an outrageous fashion. We are not responsible for flood defence, but we are, of course, willing to support the Welsh Government in any way they want. And if they come to us and say, this is too big for us, we can't deal with it by ourselves, then obviously Simon and myself will be there to support them.
Well, the Welsh Government has...
because we are not responsible and we cannot tell them how to run flood defences in
No,
Wales.
I accept that, but the Welsh Government has come to you and asked for funding from the Treasury. So how much will they get?
You didn't understand it.
And how much will they get and when?
Well, first of all, the First Minister for Wales has said that he will release £10 million in funding. That isn't going to go very far at all. Now, if the First Minister is looking for us to support him in getting more money out of Westminster Government, then of course we will be looking to do that. But he needs to come to us and tell us, first of all, how much he's going to need and what it's going to be spent on, because we have had a problem in the past where money has been passed on by the UK government to the Welsh Government and it hasn't been spent on what we expected it to be spent on. So there's an issue about making absolutely certain that any extra money going into Wales is spent on flood defences.
Yeah,
we would be looking for those sorts of assurances.
OK, the First Minister of Wales has asked the UK government for extra financial assistance. So I'm asking you, how much assistance will they get and when?
If the First Minister wants to make a case for extra financial assistance and to explain exactly what it's going to be spent on, then both Simon and I, he hasn't said exactly how it's going to be spent.
No, he said he wants tens of millions of pounds. He said he wants tens of millions of pounds from the Treasury to repair infrastructure because of the scale of the damage.
We'll need to look at the figures and look at exactly how it's going to be spent and expect certain guarantees around that. But both Simon and myself have said that we're very, very willing and we want to work with them. Simon's met with the First Minister on a number of occasions. But don't forget, I'll say this again because you didn't appear to realise it when you asked the question. We are not responsible for flood defences in Wales. And if the Prime Minister started telling the Welsh Government how to run the health service or how to run education or how to run flood defences, then I think Channel 4 News would be the first to start asking questions about it.
No, I was perfectly aware of that point.
Both you and other people need to understand what the constitutional position is.
I understand the constitutional
position. I am not, as a minister, going to start telling the Welsh Government how to run things.
And the Welsh Government has announced the £10 million of funding. The Welsh Government has made that announcement. They've also asked you for funding, which you seem to be unaware of at this point.
No, they haven't specifically asked me for funding, but they have met with Simon Hart and they are talking to him about extra funding. But he can't just go back to the government and say, give me a load of extra money, but I don't know how much or how it's going to be spent yet. We'll be looking for a slightly more concrete plan than that, because that's how things work in government.
But isn't there a real sense of urgency here? I mean, I asked you initially a question that actually you didn't answer, that, you know, Michael Sheen's point was that the people there were not getting words, let alone action. And why not act by calling the Cobra Emergency Committee, which was done before Christmas?
Well, first of all, because the emergency services have done an absolutely fantastic job. I mean, I'm standing here now. This area, of course, was underwater. 20 years ago, when I first got elected, the area behind the bridge was completely, to the other side of that bridge was flooded. I was in 2 feet of water when I walked around. Now, actually, there have been around about 120 properties flooded in Monmouthshire. It could have been completely disastrous. It's bad, very, very bad indeed. We could have seen, but we could have seen even more widespread flooding than there had been. We had.
You don't think it's a disaster?
With the chief constable. Sorry?
You don't think it's a disaster?
I'm sorry? Well, of course it's a disaster, but it's not as big a disaster as it could have been, because the emergency services managed to evacuate people on time, and the flood defences that were put in place last time in many areas actually held. So
don't you think
I'm not underestimating the scale of this disaster at all.
Don't you think it's very strange, though, that
Sorry?
the man who professes to run the people's government has not been spotted since this disaster hit your constituency?
No, I think it would have been. I think that if Boris Johnson had popped up with a TV crew and a load of people taking selfies in the middle of a rescue operation, you would have quite rightly had me on to your programme to say, what on earth does he think he's doing? Why is he getting in the way? Especially when the chief executive of this very council, in this one of the most worst affected areas, specifically asked politicians to stay away and keep out of it until the rescue operation had taken place.
He could have said something from Chevening, though, couldn't he?
You know, well, obviously, all of us are devastated for those people who've lost their houses. It goes absolutely without saying. But what I think would be wrong would be to start trying to tell, or trying to pretend, first of all, politicians or actors pretending that we're rescue workers is the wrong thing to do. Secondly, and I'm very acutely aware of this as a Welsh Office Minister, and as a matter of fact, as a former member of the Welsh Assembly myself, I'm very well aware of what the Welsh Assembly is responsible for and what the UK government is responsible for. And I'm acutely aware of the sensitivity of UK government ministers like myself, or for that matter Boris Johnson, going in there and trying to pretend we're responsible for things that are actually the responsibility of the Welsh government. First of all, it's the wrong thing to do, and secondly, it causes a damage to our relationships. With all due respect, Channel 4 News, I wouldn't expect Michael Sheen to know about the constitutional niceties, but I would expect you to.